It is the year 2020, the quadricentenary of the foundation of our most beloved Colegio de San Juan de Letran. We have looked forward to this historic celebration, beginning with a 4-year preparation of plans, programs, and projects.
Kaso ng COVID-19 sa Pilipinas.
COVID patient ang 30%.
22 po ang nadagdag sa mga nasawi.
Napansin nila ang pagdami ng mga COVID patient.
But now, our world is in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic, causing illness, stress, and death, wreaking havoc upon communities and economies, disrupting our plans. Yet, through the eyes of faith, we see this crisis as God's will, in order to show us a different way, a better way to celebrate our quadricentennial. Beyond merrymaking, we are being led to programs and activities that showcase solidarity and compassion. As always, and especially this year, let us incarnate our knightly ideal as witnesses to the faith and as champions of Letran. We are currently reviewing and revising our calendar and countdown of activities while monitoring the state of public health. We are deferring some projects, experiencing delays in the construction and completion of several physical projects, most notably the Letran Quadricentennial Building. We are reconceptualizing our grandest alumni homecoming in November 2020 and rescheduling the much-anticipated Letran Alumni Awards at the Grand Manila Hotel to a safer, healthier date in the year 2021. We cannot wait to see you all again here in our home. Siyempre mas arriba, siyempre mas Letran.
Kasi sayang ating taglay, sa ating bansa'y nagbigay kulay. Tara na't sumama ka na sa isang hindayog, tayong sabay-sabay.
Tapang ay ating dadalhin, sa bawat hakbang ito'y pansin. Hawak ng bawat letranista, liwanag sa dilim. Wala nang pipigil, tayo titigil. Ikaw at ako, isang sigaw ng puso. Simulan mo ngayon, nandito na tayo. Nandito na tayo. Hawak ng bawat letranista, liwanag sa dilim. Wala nang pipigil, di tayo titigil.
Before we formally start our program, let us put ourselves in the presence of our Almighty God. as we pray the quadricentennial prayer, followed by our Philippine national anthem and the Coleo's mission and vision.
Dearest God, our loving Lord, to you we direct our praise and prayer, as creator of the world, as giver of life. 400 years ago, upon Las Islas de Filipinas, our beloved country, it pleased you to establish Colegio de San Juan de Letran as haven for the poor, as seedbed of saints, as cradle of heroes, a school dedicated to the teaching of truth and the learning of life. On this, our Jubilee, bind us to our oath as your knights, without fear in the face of enemies, brave and upright in the love of God, always truthful, even unto death, defenders of the helpless, doers of good. May the blessings bestowed upon us lead us to serve your people and return to you in thanks eternal. Through the pleas of Mary, in the name of Jesus, Arriba. Amen.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Kayang magiliw, pero sa silanganan, anak ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang inihaw, tuyok ka ng magiging, sa manlulubi, ikaw masisingin, sa dagat at tulad, sa simulan, sa langit ng bagaw, ay nilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat ko'y tabi ay nananginigin. Ang bituin at araw na kanyang abay di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng mahal, bakit pagsinta buhay ang langit sa piling mo? Aming ligaya ng may mga hangin, ang mga tay ng dahil sa'yo.
Colegio de San Juan de Letran, Mission and Vision. Letran Mission. We are Colegio de San Juan de Letran. We are a Catholic school committed to Dominican preaching through education, towards the integral formation of the human person in the noble tradition of knightly excellence, with a special devotion to Mary, according to the ideal of Deus, Patria, Letran. Vision. Filled with the Arriba spirit towards 2022, we shall raise the awareness, efforts, and standards of Letran Manila as a reputable school of quality education that is centered on the Dominican community that preaches Christ, that offers programs in academics, research, community service that are responsive and responsible to the nation, that forms Letranites who are ready for a relevant role in the world.
Learning does not stop just because we are in a pandemic. But how does this dilemma affect our culture and bureaucratic institutions in our education? Let us answer that today in E-Dukasyon Article 14 in the New Normal for academic year 2020 to 2021. I am Aliyah Laris de Castro, first year from the Political Science program.
And I am Natalie Laison, first year Political Science program, and we are your hosts for today. For today's webinar, the Letran Politicvs have invited speakers that will discuss how pandemic affects our culture and bureaucratic institutions in our education in the Philippines. A pleasant afternoon, everyone. Once again, we would like to welcome you all to the E-Dukasyon Article 14 in the New Normal for academic year 2020 to 2021.
We are just very grateful for today's webinar, even if we are in a virtual setup. And speaking of honorable guests, we would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the presence of our distinguished speakers and guests, our respective school administrators, to our professors, fellow students, our dear participants, and those who are with us for today's webinar in the Letran Politicvs official Facebook page. We hope that each and every one of us is safe watching from their homes.
And to formally start our program, let us introduce the president of the Letran Politicvs, Mr. Emil Carrion, for his welcoming remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone, to the respected administrators of Colegio de San Juan de Letran, the faculty, and my colleagues, the members, students of the Political Science program. Good afternoon to everyone, to all of you. Before I proceed with my welcoming remarks, I would like to thank the first-year political science students, the first-year members of the Letran Politicvs, for organizing and spearheading this event. During the pandemic, almost all of the sectors of society have been affected, and mostly close to us is the education sector. I know that there have been a lot of webinars and talks about the education sector, more so in the preparation for the for this current school year. And you might think that this webinar is already cliche. However, I think the opposite. I think the organization will put thrust in the very timely issue of the education sector and how it affects us as students and, of course, to the faculty who are present here with us. In this light, it is only but timely, in fact, to have this kind of webinar, to have this kind of experience, this interaction, this discussion per se, towards the end of the academic year 2020 to 2021. Now, we have already listened to the many fora regarding the education setup in the new normal. However, those were fora or discussions prepped prior to the beginning of the academic year 2020 to 21. Now, we shall evaluate what have become of us, what has become of the education sector. We are blessed, in fact, to have competent speakers in the field, not only of law, but also of the social sciences, for us to have an in-depth discussion as to how we can reconcile the evaluation and the culture, of course, of the education system that we are having now. The Politicvs, once more, true to its trust, not only to be keen about the law, but also to be keen about society. More so, the education sector itself. Now, Article 14 of the Constitution is an article mandated for the education sector. Now, I hope that during this discussion, we may be able not only to be knowledgeable of the facts, not only to be knowledgeable of the background, but for us to also have an in-depth perception of how the education system has been already working how it will strive, and how it will continue to prosper. Dear friends, it is always a pleasure and an honor to welcome every one of you to this year's webinar. The Letran Politicus proudly presents you E-Dukasyon, Article 14 in the New Normal. Arriba agham pampolitika. Siyempre arriba, siyempre Letran. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Mr. President, for your welcoming remarks. And I think it is time for us to head on to the first part of our program. Now we're in the middle of pandemic. It is good to discuss how our culture of learning is affected by this obstacle. May I introduce to you all our first guest speaker who will tackle culture of learning after the pandemic tide. He graduated from University under Bachelor of Science in Education, major in History. Graduated from University of the Philippines, Diliman in Quezon City, Master of Arts major in Anthropology. He is one of the faculty in Social Sciences at the National University in Fairview, a part-time faculty member of General Education at the Asia Pacific College. He is also the area chairperson and faculty for General Education and the National Service Training Program area at BS College. He is the president of the Caloocan Historical and Cultural Studies Association, a member of the Philippine Historical Association, Anthropological Association of the Philippines, and member of Asosasyon ng mga Dalubhasa, may hilig at interes sa kasaysayan ng Pilipinas. His area of expertise are research studies in local popular culture and heritage, history of education, and lastly, cultural education anthropology. Let us all welcome Mr. Marlon Lopez Vosa.
First of all, I would like to congratulate the Letran Politicus for having me and at the same time having this kind of event, which is very timely that we need to analyze the society in terms of the education sector. And at the same time, a warm greetings for the administrators, the faculty from the political sciences, and the organization, and our viewers for this afternoon. So for this afternoon, I used to think of a topic particularly that will supply our knowledge in relation to understanding the Article 14 in the context of the pandemic. That's why I come up with the title of Culture of Learning in the Time of Pandemic. So by this afternoon, I would like to share the cultural aspects that somehow we observe and at the same time we experience during, before, during, and on the current context. Okay, so next slide, please. So my session objectives for this afternoon is to somehow describe the current learning culture in the Philippine context in the time of pandemic. So another point that I would like to raise on this afternoon session is to situate the Philippine learning experience in the time of pandemic. So as an anthropologist, I'm very particular with the details of how do students learn given the context that we are on the pandemic, and at the same time we are on the somehow new setup for some group of people. This is new thing that we have this kind of learning modalities, but I would like to take a look and share with you some of the data or raw data and some formal data I gathered that will describe on such if the state is successful on giving or delivering quality education for all, given that we are on the pandemic. Another thing that I would like to share this afternoon is to identify some practices that we can adopt in the post-pandemic Philippines to improve and innovate the Philippine educational system. As we all know, one of the characteristics that we are going to understand today in terms of culture of learning is to understand the different best practices that we adapt during the pandemic. Then later it will transcend to the so-called the new normal, or maybe for me I use the word better normal because people are very afraid of change in cultural sense. So let's start sharing the different culture of learning concepts for this session. Next slide, please. So as I was invited, we are going to have the discussion related to the Article 14. So I would like to start the discussion by citing the Section 1 of the Article 14 of the 1987 Constitution. So let me read it to you. The state shall protect and promote the right of all citizens to quality education at all levels and shall take appropriate steps to make sure education accessible to all. So for this stance, we are going to anthropologically and culturally understand if this mandate from the Constitution is given to our, not necessarily by educational institutions, but to our citizens, especially the students, on how they achieve, they have, and at the same time, the different experiences of the students in relation to this provision. So next slide, please. So before we go to the actual observations related to cultural learning, I would like to give you some keywords that we need to unlock for the general audiences who are listening today. That there are 3 keywords I used to utilize on the title of my talk today. So the first thing is the culture, where in culture, as per Raymond Williams in 1976, is a description of a particular way of life, which expresses certain meanings and values not only in art and learning, but also in institutions and ordinary behavior. So as we all know, in social sciences, culture is not only manifested on paintings, artifacts, or any tangible or non-tangible nature, but it is embodies the everyday life. So one of those is education, or to be specific, learning. That's why I used to have the keyword of Raymond Williams when he mentioned the word learning, but also institutions and ordinary behaviors, which is we are going to tackle this afternoon because we are talking about the educational institution and the clientele, wherein the students who are subscribing with the service or the mandate of the government on providing education for all. So next keyword, please. So another word that I used to adapt is learning, wherein it is a very big word. From a historical point of view, there's a lot of meanings when we're talking about learning. But I use to gather the definition of Klosmer that will satisfy the current context and at the same time the context of our discussion for this afternoon. So learning as a process which leads to some behavioral change as a result of some experience, training, observation, activity, and others. So for this one, I would like to adapt this meaning as a working definition on our discussion this afternoon because as we all know that the educational system in the Philippines in terms of delivery changed from traditional to some modern or maybe differentiated means to deliver learning for the different kinds of students. So as you all know, we are going to tackle anthropologically and culturally the different practices that we experienced or maybe innovated during the pandemic period. And the last word that I would like to unlock is the pandemic. So as you all know, from the World Health Organization, a pandemic is the worldwide spread of a new disease. So we are experiencing COVID-19 pandemic right now. That's why it's very important to understand that this social factor can really affect the delivery of the mandate from the Section 1 as mentioned on the beginning of the presentation. So let's start discussing the different features that we need to understand when we're talking about culture of learning. Next slide, please. So this afternoon, I would like to give you not necessarily a specific but a general point of view from the different experiences from rural to urban experiences of culture of learning from the different sectors, from the different disciplines, and at the same time on the micro perspective of understanding learning in the time of pandemic. So the reality in the Philippine context is, next slide please. I used to gather this one as our standpoint for this discussion. So it is published by February by a group of medical educators in the Philippines, wherein the title of the research is Barriers to Online Learning in the Time of COVID-19, a national survey for medical students in the Philippines. I know we are talking about on the three different levels of education, wherein the primary, the secondary, and at the same time the tertiary. So, but for this one, it can embody wherein the experiences of the different students around the Philippines. So, the number one thing that you can observe is there are difficulties on adjusting learning styles. Another thing that they pinpoint is need to fulfill responsibilities at home. So this is factors that we need to consider when we are talking about culture of learning in the time of pandemic, because these are the things which are new. And as we all know, when there is a concept of new, there's an adjustments. So for these adjustments, maybe it can both work on positive and negative ways. But using this research, we can say that there's a lot of changes in relation or in respect to the experiences of the learners. So which is we need to be particular, and at the same time we need to talk about, so that we can do some modification, and at the same time we can do some suggestions to improve those kinds of experiences. Next slide, please. So I used to create a model that will describe the new learning experience, wherein this is a formula wherein the new culture of learning was the sum or maybe the product. So the policy making, wherein, as we all know, last year we experienced the pandemic and there's a series of lockdown. But as you all know, as mandated and as one of the most important factors of human life in the Philippines is education. So sabi nga nila, matigil na ang lahat, wag lang ang edukasyon. Ito ay isang uri ng mobilidad, and at the same time, ito rin ay isang uri ng mahalagang pamana para sa ating mga Pilipino. That's why the government tries to adapt with alternative ways to deliver, even we are now leaving the traditional means of face-to-face classes. So that's why they created guidelines, the DepEd for the primary and secondary sector, and at the same time for the tertiary education, the CHED, created guidelines to somehow protect the students, the faculty, and at the same time continue the delivery of the learning. And the next step is the implementation. The different public and private institutions adopted the different ways. For the public, the DepEd utilized some of its modalities on delivering online learning, and at the same time flexible learning for some. Later we are going to analyze those. Then private institutions tries to adapt an edge among others. So as we can see, the different private institutions tries to create alternatives by means of imploring or using technology so that they can have an edge against, or maybe make their students benefited from the new system that they are going to implement. Then later, the third one is the group adaptation, wherein the faculty is going to be the one to implement the new system implemented by the institution as a collective body. Then later, the most important thing that we are going to understand now, we're in the relationship between the number 3 and number 4, the group adaptation to the individualization. Because for the group adaptation, faculties are having different styles, different mechanisms, different attitudes, different behaviors, and they are going to implement it individually by their classes. And at the same time, the individualization not only consists of the learners, but it also consists of the household and community where the learning takes place. Okay, so next slide, please. So this is a macro perspective of culture of learning. Educational system, as I mentioned earlier, that there are some ways of implementing. Some resorted to the alternative education. As we all know, the culture of learning now introduces or reintroduces the alternative education, which is really existing before the pandemic era. But it is somehow taken for granted for some because they resort for the face-to-face classes. But for now, as an alternative, it booms. And it reintroduces to the public, wherein it was utilized to address the concern on the pandemic and the safety of the students. Then later, when we're talking about macro perspective, as I mentioned in the community and households, households have a big key on understanding or the key for learning, wherein it is a general experience that memes as a means of manifestation of this interaction says that there are some basic noises, yung ingay ng manok, yung ingay ng what do you call this one, videoking, nagbibidyoke, and at the same time yung iba't ibang boses na minsan sumasama doon habang nagkakaroon ng delivery ng synchronous classes, which is another factor on the culture of learning, because somehow it affects the teaching and learning process by means of spontaneous stratification of learning procedures and at the same time strategies. And at the same time, one of the macro perspective in the social sciences that we need to take a look is the learner goals and orientation. It is sad to say that some of the students I know, when I ask them through informal interviews, I am asking them, what makes you continue doing study even though they are telling me that they are having difficulties on accessing some of the activities or attending their classes. They are working because it manifests on their answers. It manifests that education is still a good means of mobility, wherein it is a hope for them so that they can have their status or economic status into a better one. And at the same time, some of the students, one of the macro perspective that we need to understand is the orientation of the students, why they are doing, or maybe how they do complete some of the requirements, given that they have some limited capabilities. Now, they are affected by the educational system that they are expected to join synchronous session, although alam natin, it's very hard to stay at your computer for a long period of time. Pero culturally speaking, I will debunk that because it differs then, di ba, on the purpose, which is the most important thing. Kasi ang argument dyan, wherein, bakit yung iba nakakapaglaro ng 8 hours while yung study na 2 hours parang nagre-reklamo yung mga students. So, one of the cultural shocks that we need to understand na bakit may ganong aspeto na kapag laro kaya pero kapag nag-aaral hindi. So, we are going to understand that on the next slide. Next slide, please. Ito na. So, we are now on the highlight of my talk or maybe of the presentation for this afternoon, the micro perspective of culture of learning, which is I am more very meticulous and specific with the details of it. So I used to gather 5 important keywords or maybe 5 important working terms that we need to understand when we're talking about culture of learning. The first one is learning modules. As you all know, in the Philippine historical sense, that the mentor and student relationship is very important. Ang guro at ang estudyante ay mahalagang tandem sa pagkatuto based on notion natin sa nakalipas na mga henerasyon. But for now, since majority of us are utilizing both printed and online modules, the mere question of the students now is who will guide us? So the most important thing, because as you all know, self-paced module karamihan ng ginagamit ng general sector ng education, especially sa public. So that's why the concerns of the student is who will guide us. So as you all know, nakabuo ito ng iba't ibang culture by means of parents, on the positive hand, created a strong bonding with their child. So nagtutulungan sila. Pero on the other hand, the problem there is the objective is to the students must answer the modules based on what they understand on it. But the problem now is may biru-biruan nga na kapag lumabas daw yung honor roll, ang lalabas pangalan ng magulang kung sino yung top 1. Patalinuhan na lang daw ng parents. So may ganong notion, which is nabubuo yung culture of learning, which is learning modules is one of the good manifestations on understanding the politics and at the same time the culture of it, because some are utilizing learning modules to gain economic advantage. Nagbebenta raw ng sagot, may ganun tayong mga issues. So therefore, this perspective is somehow affecting the culture of learning, because the mere question there is, once you complete the module, does it ensure learning? So that's the question. And at the same time, how can we validate who answers the module? So even though based on the analysis on the some researches that some of the contents of the modules is answerable by objective type of answers, which can be Googled or maybe just can be researched using the internet. Another thing is the notion of synchronous and asynchronous. As you all know, one of the most important factors again in determining the culture of learning is the synchronous and asynchronous. Some of the students luckily can achieve both, and some institutions utilize both, synchronous and asynchronous. Synchronous is to maintain a bond in relationship with the students even virtually, to establish the relationship, and the students can have the opportunity to interact with their teachers. But for the asynchronous one, it is the one which is very on the practice in general, is more of the output based of the students on how they learn, and at the same time some supplementary materials to check if they learn the objectives of the lesson. So the concern here is learning environment. As you all know, some of the synchronous sessions are very, very politically insisting that the students must open their cameras. But as you all know, as a Filipino, there's a privacy. When we're talking about privacy, there's a lot of concerns there that some of the students, maybe on the end of the teacher, are not listening, are not attentive. But cameras are a manifestation of privacy of the people because as you all know, you are at home. So that's why whatever projected on your camera will be an extension also of yourself, wherein makikita sa likod, magulo yung gamit mo, and at the same time, yung suot mo, ano yung suot mo nung araw na yon, which is, it creates some of the culture of learning kasi some students are not comfortable also on opening their camera and while doing recitations. And at the same time, one of the biggest concern here is the equipment. Students are having difficulties to follow learning or maybe the synchronous learning because some of them do not have the appropriate equipment to support the needs of their session. So for some, they do not have microphones, but they want to answer. Some of them are having slow connection, and the worst is they do not have a stable connection because they are just connecting with the piso net in the general when we're talking about masses. So that's why this is a very important thing that we need to understand, that the synchronous and asynchronous, it's a very good, in the aspect of the management, it's a very good thing that we are implying or utilizing synchronous and asynchronous session on delivering education. But we need also to be particular on how the students use or maybe utilize this kind of environment on how they affect their learning and at the same time their personality. Another thing of the culture of learning is the pedagogical adjustments. So dear faculties who are watching right now, let's try to create innovative ways because the culture of learning right now is we are just trying to migrate the traditional means of teaching to digital one. And some instances, it is not very appropriate. For example, as we all know, we are now student-centered in terms of modality. So some of the educators are trying to create groupings while doing the synchronous session, and at the same time, they want the students to share, report, or maybe, or what do you call it, that they are going to share their outputs. But as you all know, this is a limitation of synchronous session because some of them do not have an opportunity or stability to connect with each other by means of an online means. So as much as possible, let's try to be innovative because the culture of learning right now, the students are very open to the idea na they cannot do it, na nag-grouping sila because nahihirapan silang connect. And at the same time, they are having difficulties, especially based on studies na lumalabas ngayon na yung mga first year or yung mga bagos na institutions because they do not really personally know each other. So therefore, they are having some adjustments on dealing with the other. And at the same time, in anthropological sense, texts are very powerful. Some messages can be converted to other meanings once it is read. Okay, so later I will give you some samples. So for the assessment, the anthropological or the culture of learning here, or maybe the question that I would like to pose is, how do we ensure learning wherein completing the module means you learn the basic or the essential skill of that course? And maybe how many outputs can you submit on time? And at the same time, the deadlines, wherein the culture of learning right now is very considerate by means of giving alternatives, and at the same time, the word deadline somehow reaches to the fullest extent because they do understand the context that we are experiencing ECQ, the cues, diba? So the different cues somehow will affect also the submission and understanding to the capabilities of our learners to submit their outputs. Then the last thing that I would like to raise for the micro perspective of culture of learning is the teacher-student relation, wherein nowadays talagang nagbago yung karanasan nating mga mag-aral because the concept of working hours is not really practiced by means of some students are still messaging even 11 p.m., 12 a.m., although the teachers already said that there is a consultation time for them. And at the same time, the privacy. When we're talking about privacy, because some of the students and teachers are having a particular use of their personal social media or maybe electronic emails to be the means of communication with their teachers. So what's the point while I'm talking about this? Because these factors is really creating a new culture of learning in the Philippines, wherein the standards is being revised by means of understanding what you know is how will you submit, or the personal relations of the teachers, or maybe the values integration on the teacher-student relationship is now at stake, or maybe it's now in a problematic means because ang hirap ng kumonekta, and at the same time wala nang boundary sa pag-connect because of the time constraint that we are experiencing. So next slide please. So what to expect and what we can adapt. So as you all know, expect after the post-pandemic Philippines that we are now going to have flexible and online courses on capable institutions. So I use the word, although prior to the COVID-19, some of the institutions are already giving flexible and online courses, but majority of it on the wider analysis is private institutions. But for now, one of the things or the positive things that we can adjust in relation to the Section 1 is maybe the public schools are also, or the public educational institutions also adopt this one, the online courses for their students who are comfortable and at the same time needs this kind of setup. Another thing is, since teachers, students are very exposed with the learning management systems or maybe sources, even yung mga social media and YouTube are very important, differentiated instruction will be realized in the next years of the Philippine education system. And another is rise of alternative education, as I mentioned, because this one is really an opportunity, or maybe it is a free taste for us, that this kind of modality in education is implemented earlier before the pandemic, but now we all have no choice but to subscribe with it. Then another thing is the modification of face-to-face classes, wherein one of the cultural observations is maybe some institutions are going to implement 2 days campus classes and 3 days asynchronous or synchronous classes, so that they can accommodate and at the same time they can maximize the time on giving activities for the students to showcase their learning on that said synchronous session. Another thing is the teacher training and institutional calibration, wherein everything will be changed in terms of the standards on teaching, and at the same time the capacity of the teachers and educators to implement their instruction. So it is both working on public and private. So that's why, as you all know, this is the first year also that the inset was held virtually for the public school teachers, which is a good manifestations that technology somehow saves the educational system in the Philippines. And at the same time, realize the Section 1 to give education for all, but not necessarily saying that lahat na bigyan, but somehow it offers the public an opportunity to access learning even though we are on the pandemic. And the last one will be educational subsidies, wherein these are one of the adaptations natin, that not necessarily monetary, but a technological support, technological trainings will be provided to the both students, the community, and family, so that they can adapt with this kind of new modalities on delivering education. So next slide, please. So this is the thing that I would like to give this afternoon as an ending remark for my talk. Maybe the world stops due to COVID-19, but learning never stops. And it continues to create a culture among us. So as we all know, it is not really learning stops, but siguro yung tradition. So yung iwanan ko sa inyo, but ang tradition and ang kultura ay nagbabago. So everything na nagbabago, may pagkatakot at merong pangamba o merong ilang pag-aagam-agam. But at the end of the day, once we see the result as a Filipino and it satisfies the needs of the people, somehow it will be successful, and time can tell if ever we really adapted this kind of new culture in terms of education. Next slide, please. So for the references, it is indicated there if you want some further readings related to the general discussion that I give you this afternoon. And next slide, please. I would like to thank everyone for listening, and at the same time, I want you to keep safe since COVID is rising. So thank you very much. Mabuhay po tayong lahat.
Thank you, Mr. Marlon Lopez Silvosa, for sharing your knowledge regarding the culture of learning during and after the pandemic time. That was such a great eye-opener for each and every one of us. Right, Natalie?
Yes, we agree, Ali. Now let us take this opportunity to give our fellow viewers a chance to ask questions regarding to Mr. Marlon Silvosa's discussion earlier. Participants, the floor is now open for all of your questions. For the first question, this is from Miss Ceci Bergonia. Good afternoon, Mr. Silvosa. Do you think that this setup is efficient for both educators and students? What can you advise the students who are experiencing fright during recitations on synchronous classes?
Okay, thank you very much, Ceci, for that question. So, as I mentioned on our discussion, there are both positive and negative ways realized on the new ways of learning in the time of pandemic. So, it benefited educators, siguro economically and politically, because una, they can manage their class at the seat of their homes, and at the same time, yung economic, wherein hindi sila pumupunta sa school, and at the same time, the resources can be maximized on giving synchronous session, both on students, hindi rin kayo nagbabaon. So, ay ganun no? So, but the point here is, just to give you a general answer here is, may mga positive and negative ways lahat naman ng bagay. But the most important thing is we are not stopping on looking at the areas of improvement and somehow improve it, not necessarily in an instant, but on the process. Kasi education is a process wherein it both includes the students and the teachers to realize ano yung mga bagay na yon. So once we pinpoint those things, we can achieve, or maybe we can say that magiging efficient ito. Kasi the point here is we need to take a look on the benefit of the both based on how they experience the implementation. Kasi iba-iba tayo, wherein I cannot say to everyone na, oo, successful ito. Or I cannot say na, no, it's not successful. But as an anthropologist, we need to take a look at the individual cases. Wherein as we can see, nasa iba pabor. For some, it's not because of some limitations. For some naman, it's too much advanced for their capacity. So, for the advice naman, I would like to advise, huwag kayong matakot. Wherein just, ito tip ko lang as an educator, as you can see on the introduction, I'm also a practicing educator. I used to teach from college and senior high school. So, if you are frightening on doing recitations on synchronous classes, you might think that you are just having a discussion with your professors, maybe. Parang kayo nagkukwentuhan, i-share nyo yung nararamdaman ninyo, be honest itself kung alam nyo ba or hindi. And at the same time, ito, best practice siguro that I can share for this afternoon. Maybe sa technology, take advantage of it. Kasi for example, ang mga LMS natin, lahat sila may dalawang feature. You can open your mic or maybe you can comment your answers. So if you are not capable or maybe may frightened kang magsalita, but as much as possible, dapat ay practice natin. Pero yun nga, step by step nga as I mentioned, you may use the chat box so that dun mo iparating yung gusto mong sabihin. And at the same time, unti-untiin mong aralin para makapagpahayag ka. Okay? So yun lang yung pwede kong sabihin, wherein kasi there's a lot of factors to say, but as a practical experience to the class, maximize nyo din yung dalawang means, kumbaga isa sa kagandahan.
Here's the second question po. Hello po, as an educator po, how does the new culture of learning affects you as a professor as well as the students? Thank you po, from Patrick James Wagin.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick, for that wonderful question. So, as an educator, malaki. There's a lot of adjustments that affects the culture of learning. First, yung paggamit ng LMS, as we all know. Wherein, since Generation Z naman ako, so madali, kumbaga, sabay ganun no? So, Generation Z is, we can say na madaling sabayan. But the mere concern is, for the others na medyo may technicality sa paggamit ng mga LMS, isa yon kasi nga, we used to have it physical or face-to-face. But for now, for the new culture of learning, yung makausap mo hindi mo nakikita. So that's why makakapekto yon kasi for me as an educator, as you are concerning naman for me as a professor, mahalaga sa akin yung connection, which is in education and learning, you need to connect with your students. But given the context that we are on a virtual, parang hirap nilang makipag-connect sa kanila. Kasi some of them, hindi mo pa nakikita. Yung sa kanila, medyo ilang pa mag-share sa'yo ng mga ideas. And just to give you the context that we are on the social sciences, and insights or maybe the opinions sa inyo rin, sa political sciences, sentiments are very important as a basis of understanding their thoughts about the issues in the society. So that's why sa akin, I used to integrate yung features ng LMS on the technical side, and at the same time, I used to connect some of the popular things that experienced by these students or by this generation. For example, yung mga memes, yung mga balita. So, as much as possible, gagamitin mo yung paligid in the new culture of learning to create or to extract something that you want to your students to learn. Okay, yun lang. That's the thing that I would like to share for this question. Thank you, Patrick.
And the third question came from Mr. Richard Ko. Hi, sir. What are the learning opportunities for student in Philippine education under the new normal?
Okay, ganda ng question ni Richard. I appreciate it. So, opportunities, when we're talking about opportunities, there's a lot of levels that I would like to discuss on this one. But the first thing is the personal. Una, may panahon ka sa pamilya mo and at the same time sa bahay ninyo, ma-discover yung mga inner talents mo. And at the same time, yung economic and siguro yung interpersonal, although virtual ito, yung economic stability. Kasi di-discover ko ngayon while doing some informal interviews na some of the students are doing flexible or online learning or synchronous or asynchronous, depende sa institution, but they are also earning some help for the family. So gumagawa sila ng online jobs. So this by this means nakikita natin na yung tinitignan natin culturally na ang hirap naman itong adjustment at ang hirap mag-aral ng online, nagiging advantage pala siya sa iba dahil nakaka-create ito ng opportunity for him or her to support his education or her education and at the same time to share. Kasi isa sa magandang opportunities wherein sa mga nakikita nararanasan ninyo while working man kayo, observing on the society, nagagamit nyo as an example on the discussions on your classes. Or maybe the problem itself is brought up to the class, then yun yung pinag-uusapan ninyo. So yun yung opportunities compare sa classroom. Kasi, for example, and at the same time, one of the opportunities there is, lahat ngayon ng educators and students nagiging innovative. Wherein minsan may titilaok na manok gagamitin ng teacher, while yung student naman makakapag-create siya ng isang bagay na makakakonect. Kumbaga, magiging komportable ang lahat para magsalita. So yun, isa sa mga oportunidad yun. Kasi nga, you are now having the modalities to siguro customize or maybe personalize your own learning. So, thank you very much.
Unfortunately, we cannot answer all your questions due to time constraint. However, our dear participants, your participation is highly appreciated. Thank you once again, Mr. Marlon Silvosa, for sharing your knowledge and answering the questions of our participants. Also to our participants for sharing your inquiries. On behalf of us, we are very honored to have you here today and we are grateful for the time and knowledge that you shared with us.
Now, to present the certificate of recognition to Mr. Marlon Lopez Silvosa, let us all welcome the first-year Minister for Socio-Political Affairs of the Letran Politicvs, Ms. Lee Eunice Dizon.
The Letran Politicvs presents the certificate of recognition to Mr. Marlon L. Silvosa for his invaluable contribution as one of the resource speakers in the E-Dukasyon, Article 14 in the New Normal, given this 14th day of April in the year of our Lord, 2021, at Colegio de San Juan de Letran, Intramuros, Manila, signed by Mr. Rodrigo Emil Carrion, President of the Letran Politicvs, Assistant Professor Giselle Manguiet Borlongan, Advisor of Letran Politicvs, and Associate Professor Darwin C. Ronduin, PhD, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences.
Thank you very much, Letran Politicvs.
Once again, we would like to thank Mr. Marlon Lopez Silvosa for sharing his time and knowledge with us. Our culture of learning can be thriving. We are in pandemic, and that only shows that our learning is much stronger in our hearts and mind more than this dilemma. On that note, we would like to remind our participants that in order to receive the certificate with regards to today's webinar, you will have to answer first the evaluation form that is to be posted on the comment section towards the end of this event. So please stay with us till the end of this event. Before we head on to our next part of the program, we would like to take this opportunity to thank the Political and Legal Studies area, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, the Department of Student Affairs, Letran Future Educator Society, Letran Student Council for the StreamYard platform, and of course, the Office of the Vice President for Academic Affairs. Without your guidance and wisdom, this event wouldn't be made possible.
And I think it is time for us to move to the next part of this webinar. To present to you our next speaker, he is none other than Attorney Joseph Noel M. Estrada. He is the Managing Director of the Coordinating Council of Private Education Associations. He obtained his degree in Political Science at the Colegio de San Juan de Letran in 1999, where he graduated with honors. He earned his Bachelor of Laws degree at the University of Santo Tomas Faculty of Civil Law and admitted to the Philippine Bar in 2005. In 2019, he completed an executive program on transforming higher education leaders through effective policy reforms at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore, an institution well known for educating and training the next generation of Asian policymakers and leaders. Attorney Estrada is also the managing partner of the Estrada and Aquino Law and is acknowledged as one of the legal luminaries in education who immersed and helped shape the legal and policy environment in education. Attorney Estrada is a regular resource person of the House of Representatives and Senate Committees on Education. He also regularly represents private education in policy consultations in the Department of Education, Commission on Higher Education, and Technical Education and Skills Development Authority. Attorney Estrada helped draft RA 10533 or the Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013 and was also instrumental in the passage of RA 10687 or the Unifast Law in 2015 and RA 10931 or the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education in 2017. Attorney Estrada is counsel to several educational associations, which includes the Philippine Association of Private Schools, Colleges, and Universities, PAPSCO, Fund for Assistance to Private Education, FAPE, Philippine Accrediting Association of Schools, Colleges, and Universities, PAASCO, South Manila Education Consortium, SMEC, National Alliance of Private Schools Philippines, NAPSPIL, Ayala Education, and the National Collegiate Athletic Association, also known as the NCAA. He also sits in the board of several educational institutions, which includes Colegio San Agustin Makati, Don Bosco Educational Center, and Marist College Incorporation. He regularly writes op-ed articles on education at the Manila Times, where he also serves as the newspaper's corporate secretary. In 2017, he co-founded WearEd, which stands for Web Impact Redefining Education Policy, a forum for school leaders, teachers, and students discussing school at the digital age. In September 2019, he released his second book entitled The Education Act, a compendium of Philippine education law, jurisprudence, practices, policies, and regulations, published by the Rex Publishing. What an astonishing profile we got there! And here he is. Let us all welcome Attorney Joseph Noel Estrada.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for this invitation. Maraming salamat, and I am excited to be back to Letran, no? Kahit na virtually, no? Albeit virtually. But maraming salamat for this opportunity to share to my fellow Letranites. So good afternoon to the students and administrators who are joining us this afternoon, especially to our dean. Let me share my short presentation. Dali lang ha. I'm not too familiar with StreamYard. Can you give me a minute, please? Oops. Can you see my PowerPoint? Is my PowerPoint flashed on the screen? Hindi po. Anyway, it's I don't think I'll be able to fix this in a short while. No? So I'll just proceed with my discussion without the PowerPoint presentation. I hope that's okay. Is this okay? Can you confirm this with our with the host?
Sure po,
Is this okay? Sige, I'll just sayang maganda pa naman yung aking PowerPoint, no. It is having problems with with the StreamYard yung system. Sorry I wasn't able to check eh. Oh. So anyway, I'll go straight to the discussion. Can you hear me?
Yes po, loud and clear.
Sige, thank you. All right. So the topic is about Article 14, Section 4 of the 1987 Constitution. You know, our Constitution is replete with principles and education policies that allow us to to continue and thrive, no, in any condition, in whatever calamity or change in policy environment, or even the pandemic, no, probably. And again, we have enough of it. That's why it's a constitution, di ba? Normally, a constitution can withstand whatever change that we have in the society, unlike laws that maybe change from time to time as conditions also change. But again, if we talk about education, you have an entire Article 14 devoted to education under the Constitution. No? So again, if you revisit that, there are so many provisions and principles there. And I'd like to discuss a few of those very important ones and those that are relevant in our times today. And first of all, of course, the provision under Section 4 of Article 14, which states that the state recognizes the complementary roles of public and private institutions in the educational system and shall exercise reasonable supervision and regulation of all educational institutions. So emphasis on the complementary roles of public and private institutions in our entire educational system. So that's the first principle I'd like to share with you, which is the complementarity principle. You may have heard me many times already on this, complementarity. There should be complementarity. There should be that relationship should be preserved. The public and the private education institutions should not be competing, and the private education sector should not disappear. And you see a lot of schools now folding up, private schools folding up, closing shop because of the adverse economic conditions. And it reminds me of in my readings of the Constitution, particularly the deliberations of the CONCOM, of the framers, when they put in place these important principles, katulad ng complementarity. I'm reminded of the late Father Joaquin Bernas, in his discussion on the complementarity principle. He said, and I'd like to read an excerpt from the CONCOM deliberations. He said that if indeed it is true that the primary right to education belongs to the parents, I fail to see how it follows that the emphasis of the state's responsibility should be on public schools. So with that manifestation, among other discussions, the CONCOM decided to place in our Constitution under Article 14 the complementary roles. Because initially, the draft focused only on the support of public education institutions. Another constitutional provision I'd like you to remember is Section 2, Paragraph 3 of Article 14. It states that the state shall establish and maintain a system of scholarship, grants, student loan programs, subsidies, and other incentives which shall be available to deserving students in both public and private schools, especially to the underprivileged. Now, again, I'd like to emphasize again, the Constitution did not distinguish when it mentions support to students in the form of subsidies, loans, and other incentives. It says both public and private schools. All right. Now, given these two important provisions in the Constitution, it is very easy to see that we have one Philippine education system, but it is composed of two sectors. The public education sector, you have the government schools, state colleges and universities, some are locally established, and you have the private education sector, composed of sectarian, non-sectarian, religious, and other education institutions. Also, one education system, two sectors. All right. But you see, while the private education institutions, including the religious schools, share in the responsibility of the government in delivering education, it should be able to thrive and maintain its distinctiveness as private non-public schools. I hope that resonates with everyone. Na hindi porke po tayong mga private educational institutions ay kasama ng gobyerno sa pagbibigay ng edukasyon, hindi ibig sabihin na we lose our identity as such. we should be able to thrive and maintain our identity and distinctiveness as a private non-public schools. Now, I'll tell you what that means. Now, remember, as I've said earlier, that complementarity principle, in the same line in the Constitution under Article 14, when it says that there should be complementary roles, ang kasunod po nun, that there should be reasonable regulation of all educational institutions and there should be academic freedom for institutions of higher learning. And when the Constitution speaks of state supervision and regulation, it does not in any way mean state control, but only a reference to the power of the state to provide regulations to ensure that these are duly implemented. And therefore, it does not include the right to manage, dictate, overrule, prohibit, or dominate educational institutions. This is again an excerpt from the discussions of the CONCOM that drafted and framed our 1987 Constitution, particularly Article 14. So you see there, in complementation, in complementarity, there should be reasonable regulation of education institutions and academic freedom for higher education institutions. However, as lawyer of private educational institutions and as the managing director of COCOPEA, and in my many capacities in leading the private education sector, I've seen over the decades that the private schools have been fighting the legislative and regulatory measures that control them, like public schools. I'm sure you're familiar with some bills you see in the news, mga proposed laws and bills that sometimes it's borderline absurd, and not only that, those that mandate certain things for private education, which should rightfully be done or required of the public school system, not in the private school sector. And some of, if I may cite a few, like for example, the pass all, calling for a pass all policy for all schools, including the private education institutions because of the pandemic, academic freeze, no exams to be conducted, just assessment activities, no grades required, mga ganyan, You see, in all of this, it is important to underscore the academic judgment and discretion of the private education institutions because they're run by their own boards, and also established by their own missions, vision and mission. It is not to be subject to government control, and even in the, in the giving of grades, that academic judgment that is recognized even by our courts of law. Sabi nga ng Supreme Court in one case, that is beyond judicial review. The grades and other academic decisions of schools, all right, in the absence of abuse, all right, and ang requirement lang naman dyan is modicum of fairness and due process, but the general rule is it is not even subject to judicial review, and of course that includes the quasi judicial agencies like our regulators. Decisions of administrators on matters of education of students, this is beyond review by not even by courts. Sabi na Supreme Court, you can just imagine if it were so, then the courts will be swamped with petition for change of grades and the petition to be admitted because of failing the admission exams, etc. You can just imagine the trouble that it will create. That's why that academic discretion or judgment is recognized, especially in private education institutions, and therefore there is no place for a policy for all, that cuts across all education institutions from the legislature, which says all teachers, all institutions should now just pass the students. And sayang, I would be able to, to share some of the screen captures of some news, and articles and videos of some of these proposed bills, like also now prior to the pandemic, you've heard also of the no permit, no exam policy. No? A no permit a policy or a bill that if it becomes a law, it will disallow schools from implementing a no permit, no exam policy. Again, this is it is within that academic discretion, no? And a lot of things happen even before a no permit, no exam policy is resorted to in schools, no. I cannot say that that all schools naman do not abuse this, but all I'm saying this is that this matter should be resolved within the four corners of the universities and educational institutions, not in government, no? Not in the legislature. And ano pa ba? Meron to recently, no? A bill that makes it a crime, no, for educational institutions to withhold transfer credentials of students with unpaid financial obligations. Again, this may sound popular and well-meaning, but there are unintended consequences which are dire. No, this will be very problematic, especially, of course, the private education institutions rely heavily on tuition payments, on prompt tuition payments of students, and a bill like this will be very prone to abuse. No, so that even if students can afford to promptly pay or can pay their obligation, would now be encouraged to default, no? Because there will be no consequence. Again, these matters should be resolved within the institution, and this goes against the reasonable regulation of education institutions as mandated by our constitution. Now, education is a public good. Again, this is a matter that is well entrenched, no? In our fundamental law. It is a public good, and that's why the law did not distinguish that when the state provides support, it is for all education institutions. So this remains to be a public function. Education is a public function, and even when it is delivered through the private sector, there should be no distinction. All right. Now, the state of Philippine education, as you can see, or you may have read or heard or watched in the news, 800 private education institutions closed last year because of the pandemic. Around 400,000 students migrated from the public school system to the private from the private to the public school system. Almost 2 million did not enroll, no? Or more than 2 million, no? From 4.3 million down to only 2 million this current school year, no? So merong unaccounted na 2 million from the private school sector, no? So it is also feared that more and more schools, private schools, would close, no? Because of the pandemic, and without the timely economic and policy intervention from our government. But even prior to the pandemic, there is the declining share of private education in the total enrollment in the country. Pababa ng pababa, no? So I would have shown you the illustration and the graph, no? So the downtrend is really alarming, and it shows that there is no longer that complementarity, no, that is required by the Constitution. It's also very dangerous, no, if we allow the private schools to close, no, and more students to just transfer to the public school system, because it will further strain the government resources, no? Magiging overcapacitated ang mga public schools, and of course it will affect the quality of education, no? Not only in the public school system, but the efficiency of the entire country. So here are some of our proposals, and some of my proposals whenever I have the opportunity to engage our policymakers, and here are some of them. All right. First of all, we're hoping, and I'm hoping that there will be policies in place that would eventually make students and parents focus on the learning outcomes and not on the type of provider, not on whether it is a public or a private school. The focus should be the learning outcomes of students, and that public versus private um, debate. Matagal na ito, but rather than fight this trend, I would hope that we should be able to harness the power of competition to improve school outcomes. No? In other words, the educational institutions compete in terms of quality, try to outdo each other in terms of quality, and not on the right to receive support from the government, because again, that support should be for all institutions, all educational institutions, not only focus on the public school system. um, all right, and having said that, a portable education subsidy should be put in place in the future. A portable education subsidy for students enrolled in private schools. They should be able to enjoy that subsidy and use it. Um, and you know, because otherwise, no, without that subsidy from the government, their choices may be limited, no, to the public school system because again of the cost. No? So the purpose of this education subsidy is to make the parents and students indifferent in terms of costs between the quality and in the public and the private sectors. No? So the focus, of course, should be on the poorer students. But again, that some subsidy would empower the student choice of school. No? Kasi yung kawawa talaga yung walang access, no? And again, their choices are limited, no? Because of the cost. No? Yun ang nagiging consideration, the cost of education. And it's chicken and egg, no? When it comes to cost of tuition, etc. Because again, in the private education sector, they rely, generally on tuition payments, not on the subsidy from the government. No? So you cannot naman increase your tuition very high to the point the students can no longer afford it. No? So there will be no enrollment. No? But you cannot also price it very low because again, quality has cost. Number one, you have to a big chunk of that budget of schools goes to school personnel, salaries, compensation of qualified teachers. No? And another proposal is to incentivize education as a social and economic driver by creating programs for human capital development. So this time the focus is on teachers. No? And talking about teachers and faculty, again, our position is the state support should not only focus on the public school teachers, because the private school teachers or teachers in the private sector also need government help. Now, if you look at the policy environment in terms of compensation of teachers, the salaries of the public school teachers and faculty, it is legislated. It is subject to a political exercise. They determine it in Congress. And but on the other hand, the salaries in the private sector, including the teachers, it is determined by wage boards, regional wage boards. So and again, it differs per region. So it is dictated by the sector, not by government. So you can see the disparity. So when government increases the salaries of the public school teachers and faculty, naiiwan yung nasa private school teachers. And if you look at the disparity, it's really very wide. No, yung gap has become so wide already because of the many laws that increase the salaries of the public school teachers but leaving behind the teachers in the private sector. Napakalaki po, no? Meron isang region 135% higher ang salary ng nasa public schools as compared to their counterpart in the private education system. Merong sa BARM, if I recall, 105% higher. I think in NCR ang pinaka maikli na gap, no? Konti ang difference, no? Pero mataas din, nasa 30%. No? Okay, so those are the things that we need to address. Now, if we are to support the principles and mandates, no? As as provided and well entrenched in our Constitution under Article 14. So, one of my just a few naman takeaways is, first of all, because of the pandemic, the quality education should be able to thrive in innovation and not to be defeated by the COVID-19 through retrogression. No? We should not go back to the traditional ways of doing things. No? So we have to create new policies that support innovation and creativity of schools. Enough of the stringent policies that tend to overregulate. No? Because one of the contribution of the private education sector is innovation. No? That of course is a foundation for quality. No? As opposed to a more bureaucratic environment in the government sector, the private education they decide per school, no? Per institution, and again they direct, no? They chart their own direction academically, no? Say they can innovate. So policies should be put in place to support that, no? And not to put everyone in a box as a response to the pandemic. Now is the time, no? Sabi nga nila before, no, think out of the box, no? Pero ngayon hindi lang think out of the box, no? But we need to create our own boxes because there's no hard and fast rule, no? There is no one formula, single formula that will resolve everything for us, no? So we have to find that space, creative space for education to work. And there is no perfect system in education that would counter the challenges that we currently face, including the pandemic and the attendant problems, like the economic and social issues. But COVID-19 would not wait for us when we are ready, because learning must not only continue, but quality education must also thrive in this pandemic. So I'll end with that. Thank you, and maybe we can go into discussions from our participants. Maraming salamat po.
What a very informative discussion. Thank you, Attorney Estrada. Of course, just like in the talk we had earlier, we know that some of you have questions for Attorney Estrada as well. And now is the time to entertain your questions. Our dear participants, the floor is now open for all of your questions.
Sorry hindi ko nalagay yung PowerPoint.
Okay
I'll
lang po,
share it to
Attorney.
you. I-share ko na lang sa inyo. Visuals lang naman.
So, for the first question came from Ms. Dana V. Lampasa. Good day, Attorney Estrada. As a legal counsel of several educational associations all over the country, do you think that the implemented guidelines and actions are appropriate to ensure effective and collaborative online learning?
So far naman, no, it was it worked, no, the guidelines issued, but not without the the long process of advocating and pushing for what we think, no, as educational institutions should be appropriate, no. It didn't happen overnight na nag-issue and that resolves everything, no. Kung na-share ko pala yung PowerPoint ko, makikita ninyo there's an example there, no, during the pandemic. So di ba mag-ano tayo, no? It started so last year nung March, no, so malapit na mag-June, malapit nang magpasukan, the first problem was, do we open the school year? Di ba? So that's one of the guidelines in coming up with the school calendar. That's the first challenge. And I don't know if you remember, there was that debate. Ang sabi ng public schools, we will open in September or October, no? But the private school said, we cannot wait for that long. We have to adopt our own school calendar, and they were ready by June, July, or August, no? So eventually that debate ended up by allowing the private sector to open on its own, adopt its own school calendar, and the public school system opened October 5, no? But many of the private schools opened August 24, no? And anong sunod na naging problem na at the time sinasabi ko na we cannot open late October kasi mag-overlap siya sa next school year, which actually now, di ba, at the end of the school year, that was the problem. Sabi ng public schools, wala nang summer break kasi sobrang tagal na. And that should have been easily seen before, no? Kung gusto nyong late mag-start, you should also think, no? The ending, no? So that was one, and then the next, yung mode of delivery, dahil pwede na ba tayong mag-online or hindi naman tayo pwedeng mag-face-to-face, no? But that was also very tedious, no? Alam nyo kasi, I'll give you some background. Prior to the pandemic, pag ikaw ay private school and you offer an online class, no? Our policymakers are generally averse to online classes. It was seen not as an innovation, but it was seen as as a modus or a scheme to avoid the requirements. Sabihin, wala ka lang wala ka lang pang paggawa ng buildings, wala ka lang kasing ayaw mo lang mag-comply sa facilities requirement, etc. You're a fly-by-night school kaya ka nag-online, no? So that was, and it was a privilege. You have to prove, the burden is to prove that no, this is an innovation, it works, before you're given that authority. So I can imagine, konting-konti lang yung nabigyan ng authority na gano'n. And then suddenly, everyone has to go into online or flexible learning. No? So the policies was very hard to put together. But eventually naman, we were able to come up with the guidelines, and not the perfect one, but it was enough, no, for private education to continue, no? It was able to continue, di ba? Amidst the calls for academic freeze, etc. I think we were able to transition quickly compared to the public school system because, again, of the bureaucratic processes there, as the title of the theme of your forum, no, this afternoon. Sa private sector, mas mabilis mag-decide. Ang problema, resources, no? Mas madali tayong nakapag-transition, mas madali tayong nakapag-adapt. Ang problem natin ngayon, unutilized yung ating resources. Maraming teachers walang load, maraming empty spaces, no? Sa schools ngayon hindi nagagamit. Walang nag-enroll, kalahati lang ang nag-enroll kasi, no? So anyway, baka mapunta tayo sa isa pang lecture nito. So let's just move on to another question.
So for our next question, we have Christian Eric Mendoza de Guzman. Thank you, Attorney Estrada. What do you think is the best way for complementarity to move forward and overcome its prior problems given the present circumstances at hand? Thank you again, and Arriba.
Okay, Arriba. Champion tayo, di ba? Meron ako ditong kopya ng nanood ako sino-finals. Anyway, alam nyo, the best way is already laid down by the Constitution itself, no? Doon sa Article 14, no, na kanina binasa ko, doon mismo, no, in the same line where the fundamental law states that the complementary roles between the public and private is recognized. Kasunod nun, how do we now recognize it? By giving reasonable regulation of all educational institutions and giving it that academic freedom, no? Specifically for institutions of higher learning. No, so from there, alam mo, may case recently yung Legal Education Board versus Pimentel ng 2019 about this about this provision. Sabi, this is immediately executory. You can actually already execute it. It doesn't need explanation, no? Unlike the other broad principles, no? But of course, it's a dynamic concept, yung academic freedom, no? It's not defined, fixed, but it's a dynamic term, no? Pero andyan na, di ba? How to move forward, no? So the courts now in the cases, in long line of cases, it has already defined, no? It has continuously defined the boundaries on what we call reasonable regulation. So naglalagay lang sila ng boundaries but not really no, mandating kung ano lang dapat. Pero sinasabi nila kapag it's already out of bounds, no, kumbaga. So, but the best test on whether it is unreasonable when it already amounts to control. No? So you can easily see that. And mga examples ko kanina is a policy that says pass all. Is that control or reasonable regulation? I think that is that's an obvious control. No, yung mga ganon, no? So and academic freedom, pass all, is there academic freedom there? No? Academic freedom, di ba? On academic grounds, the school or the higher education institution should be able to determine by itself, no? What to teach, how it shall be taught, and who shall be admitted to study. Yung who shall be admitted to study, kasama doon siya yung pinapasa, di ba? So, ayan. So, andyan na. Sabi ko nga sa inyo at the start of the discussion, our laws, no, are replete with education principles. Hindi magkukulang yan. No? Hindi walang sitwasyon ngayon na iisipin natin, ano kaya ang susundin natin? How do we resolve this? Andyan na po lahat sa Constitution, including complementarity. How do we ensure that there is complementarity? We do not control the private education institutions, but rather we give them the reasonable regulation and academic freedom that the Constitution mandates. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney. For the last question, or the third question, this question came from Mr. Patrick James Yagin. Good afternoon po, Attorney Estrada. In this time of pandemic, what are the possible actions and solutions to be done of the personal under education sector to make the online class run smoothly? Thank you po, Attorney.
Okay, so I'll try to be, I'll try to simplify this as possible. So what are the actions and solutions? You can summarize it or categorize the government actions into two. No? Policy interventions and economic interventions. Yung policy intervention, yung katulad sinabi ko kanina, laying down policies that provide innovation and reasonable regulation. Yung wag masyadong mahigpit. No, intindihin mabuti kung paano makakahanap ng solusyon yung mga school, no? In short, policy interventions. And then you have the economic interventions, meaning giving subsidies, giving budgets, not directly to the schools. Yung iba na simulan na sa bayanihan, no? Bayanihan 2, giving subsidies to students, those who were not able to pay their fees, they need the education subsidy. That is a form of economic intervention. Financial support to our teachers. Some of if you go to specifics, and in running online classes smoothly, di nandiyan na kaagad yung improving our internet, no? And making sure there is access, no? And resolving that social divide, no? In terms of online capabilities, no? Because maaring sa inyo sa Letran hindi sa inyo issue yan, but in other schools in the regions it is an issue because not everyone has a laptop, not everyone has has internet connection, no? So there is social divide, no? So but slowly I think we're naman moving towards the right direction, but the problem is how soon can we get there, no? So I think one of the major steps is soon, no, preparing our schools to be open physically, no, not for everyone, but just giving it an added option for the students and the parents to consider, again, to resolve that access issue. No, it's either that or no, we give everyone access to online learning. No, that would entail laptops, internet connections, which I think is a tall order given the cost, no, attendant costs on that. And yung iba, micro policies na. Ibig sabihin, how does it work? Sa ano na yan? It lies now heavily on your professors, your faculty, and your education institution. No? So we all have a stake here, no, for the online education to work, flexible learning to work. So it's not only the responsibility of our policymakers. We all have a role to play and a stake for the successful delivery of education. Maraming salamat. Yun na ba ang last question? Haba ako kasi sumagot. Thank you.
May isa pa pong question for Mr. Emil Carion. Good afternoon, attorney. May I ask, what do you think may be the process after the pandemic to transition to the pre-pandemic learning setup? Or is a transition to the pre-pandemic mode of learning still possible? Thank you very much.
So I think ang question is, simply put, babalik pa ba tayo dun sa sitwasyon natin prior to the pandemic? Meaning the traditional learning, yung face-to-face. Ako, I think hindi na. No? Kasi even before, so online and flexible learning will be there for considerable time, no, or period. And it would probably stay there for some schools, no, as an option. Kasi bago pa naman nag-pandemic, meron ng online. You know, merong tayong MOOCs. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Yung massive online open courses. Di ba? Yung mga Coursera. No? Yung mga ganyan. So, may mga online. So, you don't have to enroll, no, in formal education. May mga iba talaga na they just choose, no, yung mga online modules. Walang degree yan, pero you learn, no? You tailor fit your education. Sabi nga nila, ano yan disruptive technology in education, kasi parang may mas mabilis, no, na track, no, for you to learn things. So yan, nagko-compete na before. Ngayon, it is out of necessity, no. That's why we are, no, so we are forced to innovate, no. So we're finding that creative space for education to work. So I think because we are here now, nakapag-invest na tayo, we were able to see what works and what doesn't work. I don't think we will completely go back, no, to the traditional way of learning, yung face-to-face, may classroom, may teacher, no. So yung flexible learning, yung online delivery will remain as one of the options for students and institutions.
Thank you, attorney. Again, sorry for not entertaining all your questions due to time constraint, but just so you know, we highly appreciate your participation and questions. Thank you once again, Attorney Joseph Noel Estrada, for acknowledging the questions of our participants. We are very honored for your shared knowledge and perspectives. While to our dear participants, thank you as well for sharing your thoughts about the discussion. And now to present the Certificate of Recognition to Attorney Joseph Noel Estrada, let us have Ms. Lee Eunice Dizon, First-Year Minister for Social Political Affairs of the Letran Politicvs.
The Letran Politicus presents this Certificate of Recognition to Attorney Joseph Noel Estrada for his invaluable contribution as one of the resource speakers in the E-Dukasyon Article 14 in the New Normal, given this 14th day of April in the year of our Lord, 2021, at Colegio de San Juan de Letran, Intramuros, Manila. Signed by Mr. Rodrigo Emil Carion, President of Letran Politicus, Assistant Professor Giselle Manguiet Borlongan, Advisor of Letran Politicus, and Associate Professor Darwin C. Duwin, PhD, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences.
Thank you. Accepting it virtually. Maraming salamat sa inyo. So hopefully magkita-kita tayo in person soon. Sana makadalaw ako dyan sa Letran soon. So maraming salamat sa inyo. And good luck to your studies. Okay.
We want to thank our guest speakers for today. Once again, Mr. Marlon Lopez Ilvosa and Attorney Joseph Noel Estrada for sharing with us a very informative discussions regarding the culture of learning and bureaucratic institutions for the education sector during and after COVID-19. We truly gain new knowledge from today's webinar, and it is our honor to have you both as our guest speaker.
I am very much sure that this webinar has been very informative and eye-opening for our students and to our participants as well. Also, we would like to remind our participants that there would be an evaluation form to be posted later on our comment section that you must answer in order for you to have your certificates. To formally end our webinar, let us have the chairperson of the Political and Legal Studies, Assistant Professor Sherman Luis Gabito, to give his closing remarks.
Good afternoon, and Arriba. Can you hear me? Okay, so may I request our students to comment Arriba in our I'm monitoring our FB live to show our gratitude to our speakers. Okay? Yeah, thank you. Yan, salamat. Okay? Pagpakita ng ating pasasalamat sa ating mga kapitapitagang mga panauhin sa hapon na ito. Congratulations and thank you to our guest speakers, Professor Marlon Lopez Selvoza and Attorney Joseph Noel Estrada, for that insightful information and knowledge given to us, professors, administrators, and to our students. I would like also to congratulate and say thank you to the Politicvs, the Letran Politicvs, headed by headed by the leadership, the excellent leadership of President Rodrigo Roa. No, not that, but President Rodrigo Emil Carrion. Okay, thank you, Politicos, for this event, insightful event. And of course, this activity, Edukasyon, Article 14 in the new normal, would not be possible without the organization of the the promising first year political science students. Of course, we have also the second year political science students and the third year political science students. Thank you and congratulations. As this event, we need to reflect on things as said by our speakers. First, as to the culture. Our culture is ever changing and it cannot be changed in a vacuum. So we need to adopt and strive to it. Okay, like what we are now doing in this online learning. I know we are experiencing, we are suffering and experiencing differently in this pandemic. Okay, as a motivation, I want you to just try to do what is best and to never stop dreaming of what you want to become in the future. You can be Professor Laison or Attorney Estrada in the near future. Lastly, I would like to say this one as based from the Constitution, that the state shall protect and promote the right of all citizens to quality education at all levels and shall take appropriate steps to make such education accessible to all. First, you need to emphasize to protect. The government should protect the students, the youth, okay, the hope of our fatherland, in giving them quality education. That despite this setup, the online learning, we should strive to have a quality education. I know your batch, the students here right now, embrace a change. Okay, before, like the K to 12, you are the students greatly affected or encountered that such kind of change. And now this another change that you are going to experience, the online learning that will be adopted in the post pandemic period. So with that, what I want you to work on or to do is to be vigilant and to be proactive, to strive to have a better education. Siyempre, Arriba, syempre, Letran. Maraming salamat at magandang hapon sa lahat.
We would like to thank everyone who joined us here today, to our respective school administrators, professors, fellow students, and to everyone who are with us for today. Thank you very much for tuning in with us. We would like to take this opportunity to thank our org advisor, Ms. Giselle Mangigat, for her guidance, and to the Ministry for Internal Affairs and Public Affairs of the Letran Politicvs. And of course, I would like to thank my partner for today, Aliyah. Once again, I am Natalie Laison.
And I am Aliyah Laris de Castro, and we have been your hosts for today's event. Let us all end this with an infamous quote by Nelson Mandela. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. I hope that you live with full of new acquired knowledge. Hopefully you enjoyed it with us. That's all, and of course, syempre arriba, syempre Letran. But please stay for a while for our hymno del Colegio de Letran.
Dinala si Quezon sa Maynila at sa gayoy mga mag-aral siya sa Colegio de San Juan de Letran.
Ang 75 season ng NCAA.
Winner is the team of Colegio de San Juan de Letran.
Students of Colegio de San Juan de Letran bag top honors.
Kampiyon ng Letran.
Sa endgame kaya panalo ang Letran.
Bakas of S from the Ant-Man Mark Cruz.
Lograste seguro.